If you've never lived in a high-rise before, then you probably have a lot of questions, which makes a lot of sense because living in high-rise buildings comes with a lot of caveats. So if you find that you're somebody that's moving to Chicago and are considering living in one of these tall skyscraper-like buildings, then this video is for you because we're gonna go over everything that you need to know before you purchase in a high-rise. Hi, my name is Peter and I'm a realtor here in the Chicagoland area. If you're looking to move here and need some assistance, feel free to reach out. My contact info is down below. I'm sure my team and I can assist you. The first thing that you're gonna need to know about, and perhaps the most important, is the Homeowners Association fees, or HOA fees for short. Every building in Chicago is going to have a monthly HOA fee. These fees are for building maintenance, amenities, as well as saving up in the building's reserves. Now, I get a lot of questions from my clients, especially people that aren't familiar with high rises or Chicago, about, well, what is the average HOA fee? And truthfully, there really isn't an average. It depends on a lot of different things. HOA fees can range from as low as $400 or up to thousands of dollars, depending on the building and the kind of amenities that it covers. In nearly all cases, your HOA fee is gonna cover the exterior maintenance. So that's things like snow removal, lawn care, the exterior health of the building, as well as some of the common areas like the lobby. It'll also include common insurance as well as water. Now, where the fees vary the most is when you have a lot of staff and a lot of amenities that are included with the building. For example, if your building has a full-time 24/7 door staff that handles packages, answers calls, and is there to greet you as you walk in and walk out, then that's gonna be a big expense. In fact, people are typically the biggest expense that buildings have. Other things that'll greatly impact the HOA are things like pools, party rooms, and gyms. All these things need to be maintained, they need to be cleaned, and they need to be serviced in case anything goes wrong, and that money has to come from somewhere. So if you find a building that has a lot of amenities, chances are your HOA fee will be a little bit higher. Another thing to consider is the elevators. The taller the building and the more elevators that it has, chances are your fee will also be higher because they are very costly to maintain because they're being used all the time. One additional thing you want to consider is also the age of the building. Because if you have a building from the 50s or 60s, chances are that, well, it's going to have a lot more issues than a newer building would. And so because it needs more maintenance, because it needs more care, more fees and more costs are going to be associated with that. Now, in addition to all of the maintenance and amenities, there's also the reserves that a part of your HOA fee will go into. This is essentially a building savings account that's used for if there are major projects, also known as special assessments, that need to take place in a building. For example, if the roof needs to be replaced, which it does about every 30 years or so. And if the building doesn't have enough in reserves, then they're gonna have a special assessment, meaning that it's a one-time charge to all the owners in the building, paying their fair share to get that repaired. So you wanna make sure that your building also has strong reserves so that you're not constantly being hit with special assessments on top of your regular HOA fee. Typically, I like to see anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 per unit in a building. That usually tells me that the reserves are quite healthy. So I know I just threw a lot of information on you about HOA fees, but the bottom line, it really comes down to whether you're getting value for what you're paying. If your HOA fee is really, really high, but you're not getting any of the services or amenities that other buildings are with lower HOA fees, then you might want to reconsider making that purchase. But if you got an HOA fee, for example, that's around $600, but it also includes gyms, pools, internet, cable, and all these other different things, and the building is really well kept, then you're getting your value and the HOA fee isn't so bad. Okay, so we got HOA fees out of the way, but there are also other fees that are associated with living in a high-rise building that you should know about. In most buildings, you'll have a move-in and move-out fee and deposit. The fee can be anywhere from $250 to $500 for lower-end buildings, and the deposit will be somewhere around $250 to $350. That one, of course, is refundable. For higher end buildings, don't be surprised to see fees and deposits in the thousands. The nicer the building, the higher the fees. The other fee that you should know about are pet fees. If you plan on having a pet, and typically these only apply to dogs, then you might want to know what kind of fees the building will have for you. These could be one-time upfront fees that range anywhere from $100 to $150 for the year, or they could be monthly fees, which are just about $20 to $25. And another fee that's also worth mentioning are bike fees. If you plan on having a bike and need somewhere to store it, then that'll likely cost you as well, typically around $25 a month. Now you might be thinking, whoa, there's a lot of fees all over the place. This doesn't sound great. And you're right, but there's actually a good reason for it as well. I find that buildings that don't charge any fees for things like pets, bikes, moving in and moving out, typically don't have a lot in reserve. So if there's a big project coming up, then everyone's going to get hit with a special assessment. And you'll find that the building isn't maintained very well because pets aren't taking care of the building. There's a lot of wear and tear. Bike rooms are stuffed with bikes all over the place because, well, no one's keeping an eye on it and no one has to pay to store things there, so everyone puts their things there. So while the fees might be annoying and inconvenient at first, they do serve a good purpose in keeping everything orderly. Okay, so that's enough about the fees. Let's talk about parking in high-rise buildings. Each building will likely have a different parking setup. Some buildings will have parking garages, but the spots won't actually be owned by the owners. They'll be leased out to them. Now, in most cases, buildings do not have enough parking spots for how many units they have. So in a building where you're renting your parking, it's not uncommon to have to actually be put on a wait list before you're able to rent a parking spot. And these can range anywhere from a couple months to a year or more. Now, in buildings where you don't rent for parking, you either have an assigned spot or a deeded spot. Deeded spots have a separate tax PIN number because you actually own that piece of real estate. And so as a result, you're gonna pay separate taxes and assessments on it. However, the nice thing about that is you can sell your deeded spot without having to sell your unit. You can rent it out to people outside of the building. So you have a lot more control and you could purchase a few more if you wish. Typically, deeded spots will go anywhere from about $25,000 to $35,000 for entry-level buildings and $50,000 or more for higher-end buildings. With assigned spots, you don't actually own that particular piece of real estate. However, it is meant for your unit. No one else can use it. And if you sell or buy a unit, that spot will always come with it. Okay, so that covers the parking. Now let's talk about the rentals in high-rise buildings because I get a lot of questions about this. Many of my clients buy into these buildings and then eventually, once they're done living there, they want to rent them out. They want to keep them for a long-term investment, which I think is a great idea. And if that's the case for you, then you're going to want to understand what sort of rental restrictions your high-rise building might have in place. For example, some buildings are 100% owner-occupied and don't allow rentals at all. So if renting out your unit is important to you, then you're going to want to avoid these buildings for sure. Other buildings will have what's called a rental cap, which means that at any given point in time, only a certain percentage of the units can be rented. For example, if you have a building that has a 30% cap, well, only 30% of the building's units can be rented at that given time. If that cap is met and you'd like to rent your unit, you might have to go on a wait list, which could, again, like with parking, last anywhere from a few months to potentially a year or more. Now, some buildings might also not have any rental caps at all, but they will have rental restrictions in the form of how long an owner has to occupy their unit before being able to lease it out. For example, I just sold a unit on 3550 North Lakeshore Drive, and in that building, the owner has to live in the unit for at least 18 months before being able to rent it out. Now, of course, there are buildings as well that allow rentals free and clear. You can rent as you wish, when you wish, that sort of thing. You might be wondering, well, what's the point of rental restrictions? And the reason they exist is typically so that a building doesn't become filled with rentals. Because let's be honest, typically tenants do not take care of the properties, their units, the amenities nearly as much as owners would. So buildings are afraid of losing a ton of value if their buildings are occupied with mostly tenants. So if renting out a building is important to you, make sure you understand what rental restrictions the building may have. And the last thing that you're gonna wanna know before you buy in a high-rise is the rules and regulations. In fact, just know all the paperwork, know the budget, know the bylaws, know as much as you can about how the building operates before you actually buy into it. That way, if something is a red flag, if something doesn't make sense, or if you're gonna be annoyed by something when you purchase it, you'll know that you can cross off that building from your list entirely. Other rules that you might wanna know about are how many pets can you have? What kind of construction can you do on your unit? What can you have out in the balcony? Things like that are typically important and you'd rather know about them before rather than later. Now, all these rules, they're not meant to be an inconvenience. At the end of the day, when you have large buildings with hundreds of people living in them, you're gonna need some rules and regulations, otherwise things would go crazy. So think of these more as protections to your investment rather than annoyances. So there you go. In this video, we covered some of the most important things that you need to know before you consider buying in a high-rise, especially in Chicago. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. And if you're looking for more content regarding moving and living in Chicago, then stick around to this channel because there's a lot of it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.